You know, this place that I'm living in right now, it literally looks too modern. I think the place that I live at home looks a little too modern. There's, I mean, at the same time, it also looks too old. But there's this very specific type of aesthetic that homes that were built in the 80s and 90s have, and I just really like that type of look. And this place looks like it was built or designed in like the 2010s, if not literally this decade. And something about that just irks me. Um, but it's okay. I've learned to be less bothered by stuff like this as time has gone on. Like, stuff like this used to bother me literally constantly. And at some point, you just learn to disconnect from it because if you do not, then it will destroy your whole life. Because your whole life becomes about, like, making the overall aesthetic of where you are perfect. And not just that, but also like the general feeling of what you're doing and how you're doing it. Like you become obsessed with micromanaging the smallest feeling that gets elicited by your environment. And I think the reason I have had a tendency to do this is probably because of autism. Like when you're autistic, you're extremely detail oriented and you also are very sensitive. So you're easily affected by your environment and the feelings elicited by the lights, the colors, the smells, the sights, the sounds, um, all this stuff that makes up like the place that you're in. And I mean, I think just by existing in the world, in a world that is not perfect, you're gonna get better over time at not taking these things so seriously or with as much significance. But like, still, they're still gonna matter a lot. Like, you're basically just learning how to deal with the fact that your environment is not perfect. It's not how you'd like it to be. And that fact makes you sensitive. Like, the reason it's not the way you'd like it to be is because you've intricately thought about how you would like it to be, because each change that you would make corresponds to a specific feeling that that change would elicit. And this is something that my non-autistic family would refuse to understand about me and about my preferences, because they would hear it and then think, oh, actually, you're upset about something else. This is like a the grass is always greener on the other side type thing. And really, you're just focusing on the tangible details rather than the broader picture of what's making you sad. And generally, that's pretty smart. Like, that's a smart thing to say. That's a useful thing to say in the vast majority of situations and contexts. But the problem is, I am literally autistic, and there is a specific feeling that gets elicited by all these different factors that I can touch and smell and see and feel. And, like, when there's so much going on there, it's not just a case of me overthinking it or having some feeling and then rationalizing it afterwards in a lot of depth. No, it's just literally a matter of me trying to figure out why all of these different tiny elements affect me at a physical level. Like, when you're not autistic, it's really hard to understand this, but when you are autistic, it's like immediately you get what I'm talking about. Like, you're perceiving all these intricate, tiny details at all times, and you feel them in so much depth with such intensity that like you just want to optimize them to the best extent that you can. So I spent a lot of my childhood obsessing over stuff like this and wishing that things about my environment could be different. But at the same time, I do think that just because this is true, like, that doesn't automatically mean that what my parents were saying is also untrue. Because at the same time, I do think a lot of the time I was focusing on these tangible details rather than the broader picture of what was upsetting me about that environment. Because I did not have the full scope of understanding that one would need um, in order to diagnose the problems in what was basically the only environment I had ever existed in, I had ever lived in. And in retrospect now, I've talked about it in so many videos. I can say so many problems that were in that environment. But like, I think we risk getting carried away by pointing out these broader problems and analyzing them in depth. Like, we risk getting carried away and not also being able to say, like, yeah, these other things were a problem too. And for me as an autistic person, I think these other problems were a thing too. It's so interesting to me. Like, I went my whole childhood being pretty depressed, and as I got a little bit older, I want to say by the time I was like 10 or 11, I had had enough exposure to this concept from like media and parents and other influences that like I started thinking that marijuana would solve all my problems. And that, if I just get to the age where I can get access to this plant, it's going to literally solve everything. It's going to save my life. This is what I thought as a literal child. And it doesn't really work like that. Like, it's not just this miracle drug that solves your depression and causes it to no longer exist. I had a lot of learning to do after I found out that that wasn't the case. But I will say this. When I was 16 and I started smoking weed, at first it kind of worked like that. Like, I would just smoke it, like, whenever I was feeling really bad or whenever I was especially bored. And I would just have these, like, waves of pleasure all over me. And it made anything I was doing really interesting and really funny. And I felt so relaxed. Even though the intensity would sometimes be so much that I could feel this kind of resistance or anxiety within myself. But most of the time, that was not one of the predominant feelings. Most of the time, I didn't even notice that. So I was just smoking this weed, and it was never at a point where it was like every day. But there were points when I wanted it so much that, like, I would literally look for, like, the tiny, like, pieces of flour that were on my desk. And by this point, I was, like 17, like, around there. And I was just looking for, like, the tiny pieces of flour that were on my desk. And I would have this blunt paper that had resin on it from, when I had a blunt, and I would take that with the resin from my pipe, and I would take these little like pieces of blunt paper and just mix them together and smoke them, and I would have like a mild high from that. And I mean, if you're doing that, I feel like most people's intuition would be, okay, you have a problem. Although, in my defense, I was extremely poor at the time and could not really afford weed. So, I mean, again, it's not like I was doing this every single day or multiple months in a row or anything like that. But it was a thing I would try to have around. And I especially have fond memories of listening to podcasts and watching anime that way because it made me better at focusing on the anime I was watching and enjoying it. And the podcasts I would listen to, like I would just lay in my bed in the dark, like complete darkness, my windows like my blinds like completely covered, under a blanket, no light in the room whatsoever, just listening to these podcasts, smoking weed, and I would feel like I had friends. I would feel like I wasn't alone. And even though I had basically no one, it didn't matter to me. It didn't matter to me at all. And, time goes by a little bit, and I get on that devil medicine called HRT at some point, like around, like 18, like just a bit before I turned 19, actually. So, like, I turned 19 in in April. I turned 19 in April, and then I got on HRT in late December of that year. And I didn't really notice, like, significant effects until, like, February or March. That's why I was getting the dates mixed up. And, I would try to smoke weed or consume cannabis in different ways. And I literally had a psychotic episode. I went from this euphoric, relaxing type of experience to literal psychosis. And I was hallucinating, I was seeing things that weren't there, I was hearing things that weren't there, I was experiencing delusions. And it was basically like simulated schizophrenia. And that was the first time I ever had anything like that. Because again, like I had only had like basically just exclusively positive experiences with cannabis up to that point. And then, all of a sudden, this shit happens. And I'm like, what's going on here? But estrogen was going on there. I had way too much of it. I basically nuked my testosterone, and the exact same thing happened to me that happens to a dog when you nuke their testosterone. You take a male dog, and you neuter them. They don't have enough of it, they get depressed, they lack motivation, and they can get a whole assortment of mood problems. If they don't, then they're basically just laying around all the time sad, but in humans, it's more likely to, cause these mood problems. Like if you're a biological male and your hormones are out of balance. If your hormones are in female ranges, you'll probably be fine. But my hormones, it's safe to say my hormones were out of balance. And I basically just went nuts. I took this stuff I was able to take before, and I went fucking insane. I mean that scared me off of it pretty much completely. I did LSD once while I was on HRT. I did meth once when I was on HRT, but that was basically it. Not really any other drugs. Oh, I guess I did benzos like 2 or 3 times. And then like basically less than 5 times with cannabis. And that was all the drugs I ever used on HRT. And I mean, it was because it made it to where they either didn't work, like I would take them and my liver just wouldn't metabolize it, or it just caused these like hugely negative reactions. Or I got deeply paranoid about if I take these drugs, it's going to ruin the transition, and I won't be able to find a wealthy guy to take care of me, and I won't be able to, be able to ascend my impoverished position. I'll just be forever alone, and I'll basically be homeless. Like, I had all these ideas buzzing around in my head. So I saw, like, getting this transition thing correct as, like, an existential matter. Like, this is the difference between me being in, like, a tent and me being happy and, well, not happy. I didn't think I would be happy like that, ever, at any point. But, me being able to live, like me being able to survive. So being able to pass as well as possible was like this existential thing to me. And so I didn't smoke cigarettes, I didn't do drugs, I didn't smoke weed, I didn't drink. And I stayed away from all of that stuff, more or less. I mean, to some people in my audience, like, meth one time and LSD one time would probably seem like a lot, but to me, that's like basically zero drug use. That's like almost nothing. To me, doing that one time, was basically nothing. Because before I was doing, I was doing these Chinese research chemicals, like I was smoking spice, like I was drinking every day, I was smoking weed a lot of days, I was, I was doing oxycodone, kratom, like basically everything under the sun. A lot of PCP. It was a lot of nonsense, basically. This was my nonsense arc, and I guess basically what I'm saying here is those two instances, it was like a huge improvement for me to only do that. And now, after those like couple really scary experiences with cannabis on HRT, I feel like I've basically never recovered. Like, there was a time when I thought I was recovering. When I was doing this Delta 8 stuff, I literally did 50 milligrams of Delta 8 THC at once, like laying on a chair at someone's house, during a time when I was I was doing all kinds of stuff. Like, I was doing these Chinese research chemicals, like I was doing all this ketamine and I was basically I had basically been taking benzos every day for like a month at that point. And I was doing a lot of meth at that time. And I had taken this edible with like virtually no tolerance for the THC stuff. And I was terrified for like 2 hours of the experience. And then what happened was miraculous. I just felt no fear whatsoever of what was going on. And all of a sudden I was like, okay, I'm not afraid of using cannabis anymore. I don't have to drink alcohol to enjoy this. I don't have to take benzos to enjoy this. All of a sudden I felt like I could do it. And now I still more or less feel the same way that I did when I was on the HRT, or when it was slightly less bad, like right when I was getting off of it. Because there was a period of time right when I was getting off of it when I could still kind of enjoy it. Like, I remember, like, the relationship I was in at the time was basically in shambles. He and I were aware that it was about to end, and we were just kind of trying to keep it going for as long as possible. And I was just watching these Vice documentaries constantly and smoking weed all day at that time. And that, honestly, that was pretty comfy, even though I don't look back on that time fondly at all. Um, that was probably the only good thing going on then. So there was like this blip in time when smoking weed started to be good again, and then it just went away. Like, I stopped again for several months, and then like the first time I did it again was basically like a couple months ago. After like, at that point it had been like a fucking year since I had last done it, more or less. And I was just like, this is terrifying. Like, what is going on here? I just had a little bit and this is fucking terrifying. And every subsequent time has been like that, with like maybe like 2 or 3 notable exceptions where it was pleasurable. And it is this that has led me to believe that it's just not for me. You know, I might have like one puff if, again, if I have something else in my system that can counteract the anxiety. But more or less, it's just not for me. And I think that's okay. In fact, I think that's good. I mean, we're seeing these in-depth studies come out that basically say the thing that we've always known, which is that heavy use of this plant can cause all kinds of mental health problems in young people, as in people under 25. And I mean, that should be looked at. That should be considered. And I mean, do whatever you want, but I just don't really think it's for me.